Let's go over some of the historical controversies in social work research. So the textbook outlines three of them. First, is social work even a profession? Second, do social workers use research? And third, is research relevant to social work? So let's take the first point. Is social work a profession? In 1915, Flexner said, social work is not a profession for many reasons, but one of which is that it lacks a unique body of knowledge. There is no unique body of knowledge unique to social work. Instead, we use theories and research from a whole bunch of different disciplines. Right, so one response to this has been that it's the uniqueness of our goals, not our unique knowledge or theories or methods, that make social work what it is. And I should mention that this question has kind of plagued the field of social work for a long time, right? This is over 100 years ago at this point. And there's still been a lot of debate on this topic. But what's unique about social work is that it seeks to create applied knowledge. So knowledge that can be used in the fulfillment of our mission and knowledge that can be used to inform practice. So let's move on to the second point, which we can cover pretty quickly. Do social workers use research? Well, historically, no, not much. But this is changing. And you're taking this class, and that's evidence that this is changing, at least in terms of the pedagogical viewpoint, right? We're trying to teach social workers to use the research. So third, is research relevant to social work? Now, historically, there's been a divide between researchers and practitioners. And this mirrors the divide between what's called logical positivism and interpretivism. Logical positivism has been associated with researchers, and interpretivism has been associated with practitioners. Now, what is logical positivism and interpretivism? So logical positivism focuses on what can be empirically observed, focuses on objective rationality, observation and measurement, seeks to get at the ultimate truth. And it's associated with quantitative research, which is research that uses numerical data, statistics, typically a large number of subjects, uses hypothesis testing, so it's creating a hypothesis and then running a test to determine if that hypothesis is supported or not supported. And it views the researcher as objective, as standing apart from what is being studied. Now, there are many criticisms of logical positivism. For instance, you can only look at a limited number of variables at any given time. Also, we've learned that objectivity is a myth. The researcher isn't really completely separate from what they're studying. We always have some relationship to what we're studying, and that compromises our objectivity. There's also the critique that this has been used as a form of power that maintains the status quo, not as a source of truth. And the textbook noted some examples of how this has been misused in favor of one group over another. So typically this is now called post-positivism or quantitative research. The term logical positivism isn't used so much anymore. And positivism has evolved in response to the criticisms. For example, there's now the recognition that objectivity is a goal, not a given, not an inherent characteristic of the approach, although it is something that we want to strive for. We want to eliminate as many sources of bias in any study as possible. So now let's look at interpretivism. Interpretivism holds that we can only understand social conditions through the meaning that individuals ascribe to their experiences, and that there is no ultimate truth. Instead, what's true for someone depends on their viewpoint. It depends on where they're situated. And it holds that meanings are not separate from the context. also holds that researchers' perceptions and experiences influence how they interpret what they observe, right? So this recognition that research is subjective, that it's not objective. And now interpretivism is very much associated with qualitative research, right? Where we're using open-ended observation, detailed description, with typically a limited number of subjects. So we're not enrolling hundreds of people in a study, but instead we're maybe talking to 12 individuals about their experiences with a given phenomenon. Instead of testing hypotheses, qualitative research is typically used to generate hypotheses. So in a sense, you go in, take a look around, and then based on what you see, you start to form some hypotheses, instead of going in with a hypothesis about what you will find. And this views the researcher as a participant. So you've probably heard of participant observation, which is when an individual who's part of a group is also studying that group. So both a participant and an observer. Now there are also criticisms of interpretivism. So first, there may be more room for subjectivity. And the results are not generalizable. So what I find to be true in this group of 12 people may not apply to anyone else. And so the value is sometimes questioned of that kind of approach. There's also the criticism that this leads to relativism. So if there is no ultimate truth, and truth depends on your viewpoint, this leads to a very relativistic worldview, where you can't say that one way of doing things or one way of viewing the world is any better or worse than another. And now that may be fine in some areas, but certainly there are some areas where we do want to take a stand and say that certain practices, certain things are wrong. So if you take a relativistic view, then for instance you don't have a lot of ground on which to criticize the practice of female circumcision, because that's something that has grown up in a certain culture. And so if you're taking a relativistic worldview saying that kind of all ways of knowing and doing things are equal, that doesn't leave you any ground to stand on to criticize potentially harmful practices. Now, traditionally, quantitative methods, positivism, has been given preference in a lot of the social science fields. But recently, there has been a greater recognition of the value of interpretivism and qualitative approaches. And what's also really valuable is to use what's known as mixed methods. So this is combining quantitative and qualitative approaches together, so kind of mixing the two. And in a lot of cases, this is appropriate. However, the approach you want to use will depend on your particular research study. So I can give you an example from my own research. I'm evaluating a mindfulness-based grief retreat for parents who've lost children. So I've taken some quantitative measures. So I've asked people to fill out scales and, where they rate how they've been feeling on, a variety of things, and then I can use a quantitative approach to look at those results before the retreat and after and see if it benefited them in a positive way in the areas that I'm studying. But then I'm also doing interviews, so taking a qualitative approach, to find out what the retreat experience was like and if it matches up with the quantitative data. And so this can actually be a very strong design, because if you have both quantitative and qualitative approaches giving you similar results, then you may have some more confidence that what you're observing in your research is actually true.